All right, here's our Material Science Lab 6 presentation on heat treatment and hardness.
So our lab goal is to evaluate 3 different types of materials. We have 1018 steel, 1045 steel, and 6061 aluminum. We evaluate the changes of the hardness of the material after a heat treatment. So we do 2 tests. We do a Rockwell test and a Brinell test. The Rockwell test is a common method for measuring hardness of a material. It finds the hardness by measuring the penetration depth under an indenter by a specific load. Rockwell B and C are the most common for material testing, but there are about 30 Rockwell tests. The Brinell test is used for softer materials like aluminum. It is a 10 millimeter steel ball is pressed into a surface for 10 to 15 seconds under a specific load, and we find the hardness number by plugging this into an equation. We do 3 different types of heat treatment. We do water quenching, which is a rapid cool of a material. It increases the hardness, but it may cause brittleness and internal stress. We do oil quenching, which is slower than water quenching, but it reduces the chances of cracking, and it is suitable for alloys and metals that are sensitive to rapid cooling. We do an annealed test. It is the slowest cooling of a material, and it minimizes the risks of cracking and distortion of a material, and it allows for gradual changes in the microstructure. This is our step-by-step lab. We insert the proper Rockwell tip. The machine is calibrated for Rockwell B and C. Each material is stamped 3 times in 3 separate areas. The data is then recorded. The Brinell test is done by the TA, and we take the given data recorded. The student oil or water quenches, does not do both, of the 1045 steel, and we record the hardness for these specimens. The materials used are the 6061 aluminum, the 1018 steel, the 1045 steel, and we do 3 heat treatments on the 1045 steel only. The Rockwell B test is a hardened steel ball with a 100 kilogram force load. It is used for softer materials. The Rockwell C test is a cone-shaped indenter, which is a 120-degree cone angle. It is 150 kilogram force load, and it is used for harder materials like ceramics. This is the machine that we use for our Brinell test, and this is the equation used to find the hardness number.
For the Brinell test, we use the Pythagorean theorem to relate the depth of penetration to the diameter of the 10 millimeter steel ball that's used to press into the material. For the Rockwell B hardness test, we got a range of averages for the 1045 steel. For the different types of heat treatments, annealed is the lowest amount of hardness, followed by the oil quenched, and then untreated, and then water quenched. The largest amount of deviation was the water quenched. We had some differing numbers that gave us a higher standard deviation. One thing to note that Nick will talk about a little bit later is that our oil quenched averages between Rockwell B and Rockwell C did not correspond in the way that we expected. For this though, all of the other numbers did. So we have untreated, annealed, and water quenched that appear to have the same relative hardness. We even have water quenched having the same higher amount of standard deviation than all of the other heat treatments. For Rockwell B and C for 1018 steel, we use this to compare and see on average, is the Rockwell B number higher, is the Rockwell C number higher? And in this case, you can see that the Rockwell B average is lower than Rockwell C. For the Brinell test for 6061 aluminum, we looked at the indentation diameter and the hardness, which we calculated based on the equation that Riley presented earlier. And the depth of penetration was also calculated. We got an average depth of penetration of 0.27 millimeters, and then the hardness was about 59.
All right, so in terms of overall results, for the 3 different materials, we found that aluminum was the softest of the 3, followed by 1018 steel, and then the hardest material was 1045 steel. When we look at the difference between the heat treatments of 1045 steel, we found that the annealed steel was the weakest, actually being weaker than 1018 steel, followed by the untreated, then the oil quenched, then the water quenched being the hardest. When we look at all the estimated tensile strengths for each heat-treated materials and compare that to the literature found values, we found percent errors ranging from 9% to 15%. Overall, our total analysis is that the water and oil quenched 1045 samples range from 7 to 8 points harder than the untreated samples. Again, the 1045 annealed sample is the softest of the steel samples, softer than 1018, and that the heat-treated steel has a higher tensile strength than the non-heat treated. All right, so some sources of error for this could be the calibration of the Rockwell B and C tests. As you can see pictured here, here's our calibration disc. It has some divots on it. So if we were to use those calibration and hit a divot point, that would unexpectedly change our found hardness values. So another thing could be a brittleness in the annealed sample of 1045 steel. We actually had to swap out our sample and use a different sample because the first annealed sample was non-conclusive to our results and trends. So the second sample, while it was more conducive to our results, it still could have had some brittleness affecting the results. In terms of real-world application, hardness testing is great for quality control of metals and also for figuring out uses of high stress applications for industries like the aerospace industry, the car industry, or weapons manufacturing. All right, so in conclusion, we found that the heat-treated steel samples have a higher hardness value than the non-heat treated, except for annealed, of course, and that the high hardness values correspond with the high tensile strength. For future reference, if we were going to do this lab again, we would do more materials like brass and copper, and do more points just to get more samples and more statistical analysis. All right, that's it for our presentation. Thank you so much for your time.